The Federal is organizing the Kanyakumari Mini Marathon 2024 to commemorate Mother's Day and Nurses Day this year on May 12. This event is sponsored by Repco Home Finance.
Hello and welcome to this special episode of The Federal. Kanhoji Angre is one of those little known heroes of history whose story has been lost to the waves of time. He was the chief of the Maratha Navy, the naval wing of the armed forces of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj's Maratha Empire that existed from the mid 17th century to the mid 18th century. Known as the Shivaji of the seas, Kanhoji gave a tough time to the British, Dutch, and Portuguese merchants by attacking and capturing their ships and also by collecting zakat or taxes from them. Angre's story has been dredged from the recesses of the past and chronicled very well in the form of a novel by Suhail Rekhi. It's titled Angria, a Historical Odyssey, and it has been recently published by the Penguin Books. Suhail is joining us today. Welcome to this show, Suhail. Thank you so much for...
Namaste, Anjum Saab. Namaste, Adab. Thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure. And I just feel Kanhoji Angre deserves every platform more than my book or myself. But yes, thank you, sir.
It's a very well-researched novel.
Thank you.
Congratulations for that, Suhail. And my first question would be, that considering that he is, of course, a very, very interesting, very, very intriguing figure, what was it about him that you sort of, attracted to you, that you felt yourself most drawn to, some of the aspects of his character, that you decided to write a novel of him?
So actually, it was his absolute success. The thing is, little known people, unsuccessful people, many are born, many go. What kind of surprised me was that Kanhoji Angre was an extremely successful person in his life. And even in the lifetime of his two elder sons, the house of Angria was extremely successful, wealthy, and had done very well for themselves. And for such, at that time in the Konkan, everyone would have known him. His name was now well known, not only in the Konkan, but in Satara. People in Satara, in Kolhapur, everyone knew him. People up to the Desha, the Peshwas, knew him well. He was an extremely successful and important part of the Maharashtra Swarajya. And for him to disappear like that is what I found very odd, because we do know of the Peshwas and, of course, the Chhatrapati's family, the Bhonsles themselves, wherever they are based. But we know very little about Kanhoji Angre. So that surprised me that in spite of his success, he was so unknown.
But what made you tell his story through a novel and not through a work of non-fiction, say a biography or
So actually, there is a non-historical book in English. Of course, there are Marathi Bakhars and books in Marathi. In fact, I just found out that there is a book in Tamil. Though an English translation is not available, there is a book in Tamil that was written many, many decades ago, which is also a work of fiction because Chhatrapati Rajaram was in Jinji for a long time. But the thing is that I wanted him to be popular, quite frankly. I want to popularize his name. I just feel that such a success story from pre-colonial India is an important lesson for every Indian. And historical books, I love history, but I don't think they are as popular as fiction. And fiction is, I think, easier to get the story out. People may find history a bit dry. This is a story which I try to make the story itself interesting, and of course, therefore, one has to fictionalize some aspects to make it a more interesting tale and pick certain aspects of it. But that is why I chose fiction, because Manohar Mulgaonkar has a book which was actually out of print, and there were very few copies available, but luckily now it's back in print, called The Seahawks, which was written in 1951, 70 years ago, and then it just disappeared from the market. It was a hard book to get a hold of, and the only copy I could find was at the Asiatic Society Library in Fort Mumbai. So I just thought that route of fiction would be easier for the audience and for a more varied kind of audience. History will only be read by those people who enjoy history, and it is way more limited than just people who enjoy a good tale.
The story is indeed of epic proportions in the sense that the novel itself runs into nearly 450 pages, and I
That's
was
right.
just curious to know if you were sort of faced with the dilemma of the plenty, that you had so much material that you actually had to leave out a lot.
It's always a better space to be in. And, having worked with that, and if you do slash and cut it down, and, people asking you to focus, make it more digestible again, it works better. Though there is always regret because there are characters that have been diminished. And of course, you find when you're trying to do something kind of on an epic scale, you do need that physical space also, just to talk about the other characters that fed into uh, the story. So I do, but now that it is out there, I hope other people pick up on smaller aspects and, run with that. As an introduction, I'm happy I was able to do this. It's my, first novel, so I'm kind of very kicked that I was able to publish it. I thank Penguin for that, taking the chance on me. And yes, I was a lot fell away, was thrown away, but I hope I've kept the focus and kept it interesting.
Right. But let's talk a little bit about the how you begin your story. I mean, from his birth, basically. Do you
Right,
really think that he was blessed as a child because he's born after 14 years of the marriage of his parents, and
right,
it only happens after they visit this place where his father is given this kind of vibhuti, and
right.
and so if you could talk a little bit about that aspect.
Right. So I was actually also researching his name.
Hmm.
Today the Angria family, the Angres, they are Angre, but I wanted to know where was the name Angre? Did it come from a village? There was also a confusion as to who or what Kanhoji Angre was. There are certain sections that hold that he was a Koli at that time in during his lifetime and today. And there are, of course, people who insist that he was Maratha. Having I have done research, including with the family members, and they do have the current descendants of Kanhoji Angre a well-established story as to what their name was, which was initially Sankpal, and how Kanhoji himself was the first Angre, as that vibhuti, that Angar was given to him by the deity at basically Kanifnath temple. It was the Guru's Nath Samprada's. There's a cave temple there, which is like a you go for mannat, and they had given him this, and so he was this in a way special child. You have stories about how Akbar went to Chishti to get the mangoes, for which ensued in the birth of Prince Salim. So this
Hmm.
is a very similar story to that.
Yeah, actually thought about Salim's story when I was reading this, that it was pretty much similar. Yeah. So
Right.
also the fact. Sorry, yeah, you can complete this.
No, there's another incident as to which is also a common Asiatic trope, is that when the Sheshnag gives you shade, sits, say a child is sleeping and a Sheshnag gives you shade, they say, the child is destined to be a Samrat or a great hero or a god. Whether it is in the case of some of our gods or some of our past ancient emperors or in mythology. This is a very common trope. And this again was a story that is held true to be about Kanhoji Angre, which even if you do research amongst his popular culture in the Konkan, this is a prevalent story. So I
Right.
wanted to include all these stories that were, one cannot deny anything not being there, but these are basically myths of the legend of Kanhoji Angre.
And Konkan Coast is something you have been familiar with. You were born there, I mean, of course,
I was
and
born here. I had the good fortune of literally walking the steps that he must have taken at some point. New Kandheri, Undheri, Janjira. These are all places where you visit, as a child, and they were fascinating places with the large cannons, with their freshwater wells. All these Konkan forts have freshwater wells, which is quite a not all of them, but a lot of them, which is quite a special thing.
right.
So yes.
You tell the story through short chapters, and I was curious to know how did you work on the structure and pacing of the novel.
So I wanted to kind of recreate in the reader's mind, or in the mind of, uh, the imagination, and with perspective where the story moves from one perspective to the next. That the readers always has a large vista. When you want to, it was not a mystery. It was just a way of showing as much of the life and times of Kanhoji Angre. So even the short chapters had kind of subliminal, not I wouldn't say subliminal, subconscious focus on certain aspects that are associated with lore or legend or mythology that is prevalent in the area.
Right. So when his story is the centerpiece of the novel, the story also encompasses in a lot many ways the military history of India. And
Right.
and I want to ask you, did you want to use his story as a lens to examine the dynamics of power between these multiple groups, the colonial powers? I mean, of course, there were Marathas and Mughals, but you also had Portuguese and Siddhis and the British.
Yes, that was, because this period is fascinating in one more thing. At that time, the only established European authority or people were the Portuguese. The English, the Dutch, the French at this point had just come in as traders. They were very small. One Surti trader was worth more than literally all of them put together. The ship Ganji Savai, which Aurangzeb lost, it was more than 3 4 years revenue of these companies. So there was also, I would wanted to show the disparity that time between countries like India, China, and Iran. I mean Persia. And the West. It was a desire for everyone to come to this. It is kind of reversed now. In the same way, we hold Europe and America, and we are the uh, kind of poorer cousin. At that time, the roles were absolutely reversed. This was the center, and as far as the Europeans were concerned, our streets were paved with gold. So it was very fascinating. And just then, the chapter actually, I mean, the book ends with Clive, and Clive enters. So um, then it's a totally different thing, and things change drastically and rapidly in the next 50 years. So at some level, he was the last holdout, I would say.
Yeah, yeah, certainly, yes. Who put up a brave sort of front in a sense, no?
Yes, and though at that point, yes, the Portuguese were a foreign power, but they had been ensconced there for more than 200 years by then, or at least a good 150 years. And because of their their cannons, and their ships, they were the most powerful people in the Konkan, and all other ships had to basically drop their sails, which meant that if you were approached by a Portuguese ship, you had to stop, permit them to board you, as the Coast Guard does today to any vessel in these waters, and then they had the right to check. So they had that authority. Of course, the English did not, neither did the Portuguese or the French. And the cities themselves have had a very long, beautiful, and colorful history in India, which dates back and is pre-Portuguese. They have been amongst the oldest trade routes is Gujarat and Arabia, the eastern coast of Africa, Konkan, and they have been here for a very, very long time. So I wanted to establish that also.
Right. And you do that with a lot of detailing, in the sense that the 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 eye for detail is just so striking that you notice throughout the novel, basically. And I was just curious to know, how did you work on this detailing, and what did it entail in terms of imagining a novel of this scale, and uh, uh, what did it entail? What did it mean to sort of revisit the time and sort of draw you know
The thing is, one has to really immerse oneself. When one starts writing, one is using 1 meter, this time, just regular things when we speak. It was very different then. There were no clocks. Our measures of time were all different. The whole world was different. Dress was different. Food, culture. There was quite an ingrained caste system, but everyone, I mean, it was the most diverse place on the planet. There was absolutely no kind of religion that was not present in the Konkan, or race, or what have you. Everything that existed on earth, there was a reflection of it in the Konkan. And it was a highly cosmopolitan place. And you have to really immerse yourself. What are they wearing? By finding old paintings and miniatures of the time. What gifts were being given? What were their priorities? So these things just come about from absolute research, and one has to literally immerse yourself in the language of the different kinds of people there were there, their religion, their food, their customs, and of course, kind of travel back in time. So it's at some level, it's trying to travel back to that period.
Hmm. But the very fact that it is your first novel, does that does that really matter? That when you're writing your first novel, these are things that become really especially hard for a writer. How do you look at it?
So I think it is a very important thing to do. If one does not, if one if ignores that as to how, where are people relieving themselves, what is in their market. I had my history teacher, hats off to him, Mr. Gautam Sen, yeah, taught me history in high school, and he used to tell me, uh, you know, imagine, close your eyes, and literally in your mind, imagine you're going down to the bazaar of whatever it's, the Red Fort, or what have you. You literally go down and try to recreate that bazaar in your mind. What fruits are available, what products are available, because that's it tells you what the economy is, where the place of everything is in the world, social structure, uh, all these things. So I think these things are very important, how things look and feel. And that's the fun, right? It's like recreating a set. If you're doing a period piece, you need to recreate that entire set to give you that look and feel.
Right.
And in writing, it comes through research.
True. There's so much, coming back to Kanhoji's character, and there's so much about him that while reading the novel, you do feel that what is real and what is imagined. For instance, this whole power dynamics between the Marathas and the Mughals, and early in the novel, somewhere I think his father, is talking about uh, Dara Shikoh, and how
Right,
Aurangzeb sort of what Aurangzeb did to him, basically. And I
right.
was just would you talk a little bit about this changing sort of dynamics at that point of time, and especially in the context of Maratha versus the Mughals, if you could talk about that, because I'm asking you because we are living in a time when history is a contested zone, isn't it?
There are a lot of people who feel that the problems we are facing in India kind of had a start uh, at that period when Dara Shikoh lost to Aurangzeb. The Mughals were a Turkic people, and they came in very small numbers and were able to quickly ally themselves with the majority of the Indian population, which is something earlier rulers were unable to do. Here they were looking to create an empire, a system, which is something also Sher Shah did, and they did inherit. I mean, use Akbar was smart enough to use a lot of the systems Sher Shah had put into place. But a lot of people feel that had it been Dara Shikoh, who was a great student and a intellectual, uh, India would have been, South Asia would have been a different creature, and and maybe a less violent one, a more accepting one. From all directions, it would have just gone a different way. So that is kind of an important thing, because Aurangzeb, when he took over, he was bound to, because he was militarily more efficient, and therefore that's why he won. And he was able to extend the Mughal Empire to its largest extent, but also to breaking point. It was just stretched and it snapped, basically. His death snapped, and that was the end of the Mughal Empire for all practical purposes. He was the last great Mughal. After that, there were people ruling in proxy, using the peacock throne or whoever sat on it as a puppet. Of course, that ended with the Maratha Federation, and then the English were the last. They also required the seal before they sent the last Mughal off to Rangoon. But so that is also very important, that how important Delhi is. Today also we are facing these issues that people say, "Arey yaar, everything goes to Delhi and UP." Other states are saying we get ignored, but this has a very old history, ancient history in India, and I think it was created by the Mughals, by establishing the old capital, which goes back literally hundreds of years. And you can, if you go back to the Ramayana and things like that, you talk about Indraprastha and everything which is in that area. So obviously that bank of the Jamuna has held sway and been a center for power in the subcontinent for hundreds of years. And there is always conflict between center and state. And this is reflected in Kanhoji's frustration, which at some point, he's also experiencing it as a local leader.
And that becomes much more agonizing towards the end of his life, isn't it? When he could see what is happening, and and the pain that he gets out of it, right?
Right. And Kanhoji's, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yes, sir. So, yeah, and what that is the first thing the Peshwa, it's a question of exposure.
Hmm.
So, the as soon as the first Baji Rao's father, he himself had realized that, the Maratha future at some level cannot be satisfied without involvement in Delhi. That we cannot say that we are separate over here, and at some level it is the interconnectedness of the whole subcontinent. There's always been in Indian history this thing as to when did this feature of what today we call Bharat Sarkar or India, Desha, what is the name? Did we have a sense of that we were one country at some level? Not a country, but a now we call it subcontinent, but a kind of the same thing like in Europe at some level. A Greek is different from a Portuguese, but they have a sense of being European. So I think this has always existed in India, that whether you're from Assam or the Tamil Nadu or from Kashmir, Punjab, there is this sense that there is a cultural bond in this area, which I think extends all the way to Afghanistan, and of course Pakistan and Bangladesh were India, but all the way to Rangoon and Burma, and of course Nepal. It's been a distinct country for many years before partition or independence, but also a great cultural association with India.
Right. And also the fact, Suhail, that this novel, of course, is a historical novel, and we are living at a time when we tend to pit one historical figure or a hero against another. And
Right.
how would you respond to that? It's a travesty, but I just wanted to understand your take on this.
Well, uh, the thing is, Aurangzeb would love to have Shivaji.
Right.
Uh, I mean, but what he wanted is that he wanted Shivaji to be another of his very highly ranked sardars and handle the Deccan. He always. It is not in my book, but in my previous in the edited version, you have exactly. I had put in a lot as to Aurangzeb's respect for Shivaji. He had great respect for Shivaji because of his competence. They were both militarily very astute figures, and he had great respect for Shivaji. Shivaji was, in fact, called to the court in Agra, where subsequently he was arrested. But there it was an issue of him being relegated to the backbenches, which upset his, it bothered his ego, and it was basically a caste equation. They were the old people who were, quite frankly, the relatives of the Mughals, and they were like, who are these people who are going to take over our mansabdari or our and then later on, of course, you had the Nizam who held sway in the Deccan, but
Yeah.
the other option was Shivaji. His father Shahaji was the senapati of the Bijapur kingdom, and they had extensive jagirs in the south, and today their descendants are the Rajas of Tanjavur. So it's absolutely fascinating, and there is, if you look, history is way more interesting. I mean, you can boil it down to jingoistic tropes, but that is, I think, for the street mob. I don't know that if it has any place in interesting literature or in history at all.
Absolutely. You mentioned caste, and I wanted to ask you about this subtext of casteism in the novel. In Gurukul, for instance, one of the earliest encounters with his guru happens when he's asked that who are you, or something of the sort, and he says that I'm a Kshatriya, and then what happens? Would you talk a little bit about that? That even how accentuated caste as a factor was even then.
So that is a kind of a basic social structure in India and has been for thousands of years. But what I was trying to show then was, which I kind of, that is what research has shown me, that prior to the English coming and, dichotomizing all of us into these sections, it was caste was there, but it was mobile. It was the people moved up and down. Nothing was fixed. And it's only after that we see that where they have this tendency, to do census of everything. This is and dichotomize people on caste. Then it became fixed. Today in Maharashtra um, there is a caste reservation being demanded by the Marathas,
Yes.
right? And the OBCs are there is obviously resistance. They feel, uh, everyone's got their point of view. So that is something to think about, right? That even now there are castes like the Jats or the Jats. They also come in different categories in different states. So obviously, it is something that was mobile earlier on, and it was fluid. People were moving up and moving down, sideways, all over the place. And it is only after that where it became fixed and rigid, where you have a criminal caste and people are branded as criminals. you know they're the ones who have taken it to that extent. This was so I'd like to my research has shown that
Mm.
prior to colonization, caste was fluid.
One last question, Sohail,
Yes.
about historical fiction. I mean, we in recent years we have had many wonderful fiction writers writing, novels which have the backdrop of history. And would you like to talk about what is it about this that fascinates you as a writer? And if you could talk a little bit about some of the historical fiction writers who you find most fascinating.
Well, I'm a very big fan of Amitav Ghosh's. I used to, I think earlier on it was a love for a lost time, just reading Rudyard Kipling or, something like that. But when Amitav Ghosh came, it was sort of like, by the people, for the people. It was the Indian perspective was so different and uh, accessible. Uh, and the way he could transport me and make me wait literally for years, for his Ibis trilogy. Really, it was painful waiting for those books to come out. uh, you constantly cover, kind of thing. And so that really and then I realized our history is so immense, our history, our geography is so immense that one also needs focus, to build a kind of mastery over any subject. Now, if you're in history, today I could be focusing on Maharashtra, tomorrow it could be Karnataka or Punjab. But once you're in that milieu, you get better at doing that. And as far as I'm concerned, I have literally more stories than I have the time to write, and it just gives me more focus, and I think it'll make me better and more interesting writer. Whereas, this is my field. This is, a reader can assume that, okay, he knows this stuff. If I put myself all out, another great writer was James Michener, absolutely fantastic, or Clavel. But they also had that ability which I don't think I have, to go and research different parts of the planet and really get into those stories. I'm very happy with India. I like to travel in India. I think our country is big enough to spend, all your holidays here, all your attention here. Not that, there's not anything wrong with the rest of the world, but I mean, there's just enough material over here. And for the next generation, you want to do it for not only the next generation, but for other Indians out there.
Right, I'm sure in your next book you're going to draw on another, interesting story and a little known hero of history that you're going to highlight in your next book. Well, on that, thank you so much, Sohail, for joining us. It was really lovely
Thank you,
talking to you.
Anjum Saab. Thank you very much.
The Federal is organizing the Kanyakumari Mini Marathon 2024 to commemorate Mother's Day and Nurses Day this year on May 12. This event is sponsored by Repco Home Finance.